So a very, very warm welcome for an in-person this year, although we did quite well last year with the video, I think. Very warm welcome to our 2021-22 Vital Signs Report launch event. Just in case you don't know, I'm Ian Revel, I'm Chief Exec of the Community Foundation, and together with my wonderful team, we're going to present you the highlights and findings of this year's Vital Signs Report. Very, very warm welcome to our supporters, our donors, our grantees, our High Sheriff, thank you for coming, our Mayor, thank you for coming. We've got, I think Alexander's going to be online later, but also our Vice Presidents in the room, thank you very much for coming, and of course our trustees are also with us this morning. Some will have badges, some will have forgotten badges, but they'll make themselves known to you. Vital Signs, what is it? Well, it's our annual research report which pulls on existing data that is out there in all various institutions, and it brings it into a digestible form so that we can use it to inform our grant giving and philanthropy in the city. It normally focuses on 12 specific themes every 3 years, and in between we do an interim report which focuses on 3 or 4 priority areas. This year, in fact, is our 9th annual Vital Signs Report since 2013. And next year is the biggie, so this year it's an interim report with 3 or 4 specific themes. The themes this year are health and well-being, poverty and disadvantage, work, and education. And as in the previous couple of reports, we've integrated the impact of diversity, equity and inclusion throughout the report. It doesn't have a specific area, but it's in all the other areas. Specifically, we thought about that. This year, we're also going to hear from June in a minute about the fact we've decided to incorporate the UN Sustainable Development Goals in our reporting. As a result of that, we've not produced thousands of the actual reports to print. We've got some for you, but this year it's going to be mainly electronic, and we're really, really hoping that you're going to share. I'll remind you of that at the end. So, I'm going to welcome the team, June, Ranjit and Michaela, to present this year's report. We'll start with June. Over to you.
Thank you, Ian. And good morning. Good morning. So, the Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as the Global Goals, are a worldwide call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. These 17 goals, building on the Millennium Development Goals, call on all countries, developed and developing, to work together in a global partnership. We felt a natural alignment with the global goals through our Vital Signs and through our Vital Thinking events. Like Vital Signs, the goals are interconnected. Often the key to success for one will involve tackling issues more commonly associated with another. Many of our corporate supporters refer to the global goals as part of their environmental, social and governance policies. By linking them to Vital Signs, we make them more relevant to corporates and use the same language as our local business community. This also helps to increase the awareness of the global goals within the local community, showing how the impact of what we do locally in Milton Keynes can make a difference more widely, both nationally and internationally. Within each of the 17 goals are a number of targets. As an organisation, while we support all of the goals, we have decided to focus on 7 specific areas which will be reflected in our grant making and fund development strategies. And these are outlined in more detail in the report. But the 7 are Goal 1, no poverty. Goal 3, good health and well-being. Goal 4, quality education. Goal 7, access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy. Goal 10, reduce inequalities. Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities. And Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. We're also keen to challenge ourselves as an organisation to do better, particularly in respect of sustainability, energy efficiency and responsible consumption, hence the reason we've reduced the number of copies of Vital Signs we've produced. This will bring an important focus to our funds, grant giving and our internal activities, so that we can demonstrate our impact in Milton Keynes and how we can make local changes for global good. I'm now going to hand over to Michaela.
Mental health continues to be hugely impacted as a result of the pandemic, with Mindwheel NK reporting that there were over 2,559 instances of support requests last year. Looking through the lens of isolation and loneliness, nationally, the Mental Health Foundation reported that those surveyed in November 2020, 25% of adults expressed feelings of loneliness. And the measures to control coronavirus were having significant impacts on people's mental health, with the report showing that 45% of those surveyed felt unable to cope with the uncertainty of the pandemic, and a quarter of them were worried how they would cope with self-isolation. As a result, as with last year's report, we've continued to focus on older people and younger people. This year we also wanted to highlight sectors of our community whose mental health have been adversely affected by the pandemic. This includes the LGBTQ+ community and the neurodivergent community. A study by the Mental Health Foundation found that loneliness is still an issue for young people, with 48% of young people aged 18 to 24 being the highest demographic of those experiencing feelings of loneliness. Local service providers are also experiencing an increase in referral numbers, with Arthur Ellis reporting that referral numbers have more than doubled when comparing since the first lockdown last year. And yes, the Young People's Mental Health Service have also identified an increase in service users with the age range 15 to 17 requiring the highest level of need. Many young people are also experiencing or presenting more complex issues of need. In Milton Keynes, the share of the population aged 65 and over is 14%. Loneliness and social isolation were significant issues for older people before the pandemic, with research showing this link to premature death. These issues have been worsened by the consequences of lockdown and shielding. According to Age UK, more than 2 million people in England are aged 75 and over and live alone, and more than 1 million people say they go for over a month without speaking to either a friend, neighbour or relative. Couple this with the lockdowns and shielding requirements, our local service, Age UK Milton Keynes, has seen a rise of 104% in their telephone befriender service. This is a service which was set up at the beginning of the pandemic to combat the effects of isolation and loneliness. Adding on to this, some of the consequences of the lockdowns and shielding are having long-term effects on older people, with Age UK Milton Keynes reporting that they have seen many of their clients reluctant to return to face-to-face. They don't want to go into public spaces, supermarkets or public areas. The suspension of social activities during the lockdowns have left many older people feeling isolated and lonely. Although many of the activities have been replaced by an online alternative, it is estimated that there are around 4 million people aged 65 and over in the UK who have never used the internet. Additionally, for some with long-term health conditions such as dementia, using technology can be more difficult for them. The COVID pandemic has created change for many of us, but for the neurodivergent community, changes in routines have created additional hurdles. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term used to describe alternative thinking styles. This can include dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism and ADHD, to name a few. It is estimated that more than 15% of people in the UK have some form of neurodiversity. With the pandemic bringing about numerous lockdowns, many services were halted or the level of support beneficiaries relied upon became sparse. A talkback report for MK Council found that 67% of people with learning difficulties and/or autism reported being lonely as a result of the lockdown. The report also notes that the loss of social contact, in particular not being able to see friends or relatives outside of their household, made coping with the changes due to COVID even harder. Accessing support services in a timely manner has been made worse by the pandemic. The National Autism Society details that the impact on mental health and loneliness has been felt more strongly by those with additional support needs. As the country returns to the new normal, it is expected that social isolation will have long-term impacts on the neurodiversity community, with both local services, Talented Unlimited and AS Meetup suggesting some of their beneficiaries are already expressing to them they feel they've lost some interpersonal skills, social skills and lack confidence, especially in one-to-one situations. Last year's Vital Signs report showed that isolation due to the pandemic had a significant detrimental impact on the LGBTQ+ community. Going forward, this is something we've continued to see. A report by LGBT Hero in May 2021 reported that 12% of trans and gender diverse people reported feeling 3 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to cis people. Just like us, a LGBTQ+ young persons charity reported that LGBTQ+ young people are twice as likely to feel lonely and more than twice as likely to worry about their mental health on a daily basis during the pandemic compared to their non-LGBTQ+ peers. Finally, it's also important to note that isolation and loneliness does not only impact young people, but also particularly older members of the LGBTQ+ community. Research shows that older members of the community are especially vulnerable to isolation, as they are more likely to be single, live alone, and have lower contact with relatives. With charity Opening Doors reporting that 35% of older people surveyed felt more lonely than usual due to the pandemic. As you will have seen, mental health, and in particular isolation and loneliness, is still an area which is emerging. As we transition into the new normal, we expect to see more reports being published on the impact the pandemic has had on our community's mental health. We will be watching closely on how sectors of our community emerge from the pandemic. I will now pass over to Ranjit, who will talk us through the stats for diversity and for disadvantage and poverty.
Thank you, Michaela. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about disadvantage and poverty. So poverty can be defined in many ways. The most used measure in the UK is relative poverty, which considers people living in poverty when they live in households with income below 60% of the median of that year. A key principle of the new measure is that poverty should be related to the extent to which people have the resources to engage adequately in a life regarded as the norm in society. Other definitions consider that income alone does not determine whether someone is in poverty or not. Material deprivation considers whether individuals have access to essential items and key services. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic and far-reaching restrictions on public life in 2020 and the first half of 2021, Milton Keynes performed relatively well in terms of deprivation and poverty. Child poverty rates dropped slightly, while employment rates increased. At the same time, Milton Keynes is a city of large disparities, with child poverty rates almost 3 times higher in its most deprived areas compared to most affluent parts of the town. Wages have dropped at a much larger rate in Milton Keynes than in the rest of the nation, making it hard to work for working families to make ends meet. The number of people requiring support through job seekers allowance and universal credit remains high, at more than twice the level compared to before the pandemic. The number of rough sleepers dropped significantly, although this is due to emergency measures put in place rather than reflective of reduced need. And the number of people provided with emergency accommodation increased sharply in the last quarter of 2020 and into 2021. So some key facts. An estimated 10,726 or 17% of children were living in poverty in 2020, although some areas of Milton Keynes showed child poverty rates as high as 31%. The proportion of children eligible for free school meals increased from 15% to 18.4%. And in 2019, the index of multiple deprivation indicates that 28 of the 132 local areas listed for Milton Keynes belong to the 20% deprived areas in England. 2 areas belong to the 2% most deprived in England. Employment increased slightly to 80.9% in 2020 compared to 78.3% in 2019, although median gross pay for a full-time worker in Milton Keynes dropped by 4.9%. The number of claimants of job seekers allowance and universal credit remained reduced slightly in the last year, from 9,560 in June 2020 to 9,310 in June 2021. This is still double the number of claimants compared to pre-pandemic levels. The number of rough sleepers counted on a single night decreased from 35 in 2019 to 18 in 2020, and the number of people in emergency accommodation rose from 31 in September 2020 to 69 in January 2021. So now I'll talk to you about work. So the coronavirus pandemic has had a huge impact on businesses and employment, nationally and within Milton Keynes, particularly for younger people. Some impact has been temporary and in some cases permanent. Closures, particularly in the retail sector, as a shift towards online shopping has left vacant units in our shopping centres and high streets. Although in general employment levels are higher in Milton Keynes compared to other areas of the country, statistics are showing that in some wards such as Woughton and Fishermead, Bletchley East and Central Milton Keynes, levels have almost doubled. Milton Keynes has a lower unemployment rate than some of its neighbouring areas such as Northampton, Bedford and Luton, but higher than Central Bedfordshire, North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. In Milton Keynes, accommodation, hospitality, arts, entertainment and recreation saw the largest percentage of employees on furlough, at an average of 28% in April 2021. Wholesale, retail, accommodation and food services saw the largest number of employees furloughed, a total of 3,020 in April 2021. Young people have been mostly impacted by high rates of unemployment. The impact has been driven by the sector's young people who predominantly work in hospitality, retail and leisure. The end of the £20 per week universal uplift will take effect this week, in fact tomorrow, seeing more than £1,000 a year loss of income into a household. A survey conducted by YouGov on behalf of the Trussell Trust shows that the uplift provided vital breathing space to hard-pressed budgets, with 7 in 10 people on universal credit since early 2020 saying the increase has made it easier to afford essentials. The most common experience people shared with us was that the uplift allowed them to reliably afford basics without, for example, have to go without food or ration the amount of time the heating was on. Having to go without essentials has been a common experience for people before the uplift. Lack of childcare provision, be it from older family members or local nurseries and school, has had impact on access to employment, having a particular impact on women and younger members of the community. We foresee the government's ending of the furlough scheme on the 30th of September will have a detrimental impact on employees and employers alike. We have already seen the effects on lower paid workers being most likely to be furloughed and lose pay as a result. Finally, on a positive note, Milton Keynes has seen economic growth during the pandemic and will be one of the top 3 cities for economic growth during the Q4 of 2021, with IT companies faring well during this time. Thanks for listening to my section, and I'll pass you over to June, who will talk about education.
Thank you, Ranjit. So the COVID-19 pandemic impacted education at all levels, from early years settings through to secondary, further education and apprenticeships. In 2020, those starting apprenticeships in the UK fell by 46% compared to 2019, with the worst affected sectors being health and social care, business management and hospitality. In Milton Keynes, apprenticeships taken from the 8 months from September 2020 to March 2021 was 680. For the same period in 2019 to 2020, the number was higher at 1,480. So on a pro-rata basis, the 2020 fall in apprenticeships for Milton Keynes was 55% lower. In Milton Keynes, 15% of apprenticeships were taken up by students from the BAME community, compared to 7.6 in Northampton and 9.2 in England overall. And although apprenticeship opportunities took a large fall during 2020, as the economy effectively closed for many industries and existing staff were furloughed, there are good signs that the numbers are starting to pick up. Employees with government support are seeing apprenticeships as a key part of their COVID-19 recovery plans. While apprenticeships are a bridge into employment, getting a good start in education is also critical. And as Ranjit mentioned, nurseries particularly saw a decrease in attendance during the first part of this year, some because of closures, putting pressures on parents working from home, others because parents were reluctant to return to open nurseries if the result was them being unable to work due to having to self-isolate as a result of a COVID outbreak. According to an interim report, by the end of the spring term, primary age pupils had experienced a learning loss in reading equivalent to over 2 months, while in mathematics the loss was greater than 3 months. Between March 2020 and the end of the summer term, early years settings, schools and colleges were asked to limit attendance to reduce transmission of coronavirus. Schools across England reopened to all year groups from September 2020, with students sent home in bubbles to self-isolate when corona cases were detected. The Department for Education showed that Milton Keynes pupils from state-funded primary, secondary and special schools missed more than 200,000 days of face-to-face teaching in the 2020 autumn term as a result of having to either self-isolate or shield due to COVID. From the beginning of the autumn term, schools were asked to welcome back all pupils to school full-time. From the 5th of January, schools were asked to provide on-site education for vulnerable children and children of critical workers only. And this remained in place till the 5th of March. So although attendance at all levels of schooling has bounced back, the impact of these absences, self-isolation, inadequate homeschooling and access to IT, friends and mentors will have an ongoing impact on educational progress. Schools, teachers, parents and pupils will all require some measure of additional support across 2021-2022 school year. An Education Endowment Foundation report showed a consistent lack of academic progress across age groups compared to previous years, and in particular a marked gap in the attainment for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. I'm now going to hand over to Ian, who will talk about our Next Generation Fund.
So we don't normally talk about fund at Vital Signs, but we think it follows on from all the information you just got. As June just mentioned, we have launched a Next Generation Fund. It was launched at our 35th birthday in June. I'm going to make no apologies for saying some of this again, because I think it needs to sort of land. Remember, the pandemic has hit young people particularly hard. Youth unemployment has more than doubled since March 2020. Retail, hospitality and entertainment closed down for long periods. Industries that are often the route into employment for young people. Those approaching employment age have also been affected with the schools being closed, and we just heard about those numbers. COVID has had a considerable negative impact on young people, with many fears that the COVID generation could, throughout the period of their working life, have long periods of unemployment. So in response, we've created the Next Generation Fund, and this aims to support young people back into work and into education. The aspiration is to close the gap created by the pandemic. So the criteria will be projects that support young people who have been disadvantaged due to COVID back into meaningful education, training or employment. I need to wrap up now. I'd like to end by, sort of follow on from the Kashida, some thank yous. Thank you firstly to our wonderful team that produced this year's report, to my colleagues, not just the ones that sit in here, also the team in the office that have done a lot of work behind the scenes. And to, of course, our fabulous volunteer researchers, Amanda Saville, Andy Evans, Elizabeth Rathbone, Henry Woodcock, Jessica Dell and Katie Rowland. Thank you very much, our editorial team. For the editorial panels from Arthur Ellis, Mind BLMK, Red Cross MK, St Mark's Mills and YIS, the Young People's Mental Health Service. And to our very own trustee, Jason Sinclair, who did a bit of work trying to pull that wonderful bits of research into one voice. Thank you also for the video and production team, Rebecca Fewins and Hayley Bruin, our Marcoms team that are now turning bright red at the back of the room. Thank you very much for all your amazing work and effort. Blue Cube Creative, who have done the design work, and our very own Robert Rakeen, our Vice President, who did the proofreading. Thank you very, very much. Where's Robert? Thank you. Oh. Also, Matt Worthing, who's doing the Storm video, who's got the high pressure job of getting this video out by midday. Of course, also, I'd like to thank our trustees and honorary structure for all you do in the background in supporting the team to deliver Vital Signs, and of course our response to those findings. So what's next? The virtual report is now available on our website. Oh, I've got the comms team now arguing with each other at the back of the room. It will be available on the website very shortly, in about 30 minutes. We will give you a copy as you go out. But the thing to do is not, these are not to get dusty. The impact of the report is to share, share, share. We need you to share everywhere. We will be doing quite a lot of social media over this over the next few weeks, so please retweet or copy on it, all the social channels when they're working. We need you to discuss it with your friends, with your families and with your colleagues. Otherwise it's not worth anything. It's only the value of vital signs is when it is shared and spoken about and reacted to. We also, of course, invite you to join us on the Vital Thinking events that will be running throughout the year. And we, of course, ask you to warmly welcome you to join us as friends or as companies in delivering real change in Milton Keynes. This is a short report. There is also a very detailed, long report behind all this production, and that will be available on the website also this afternoon. That has all the data sources, so you can go a little bit deeper if you wish. The unedited video, so if you want to watch this all again, it will be available for midday, and then over the next few weeks it will gradually be tidied up and split up so that you can share it more widely. But if you want to share it with any colleagues or family and friends, that will be available on our website again by lunchtime. So, thank you very much for coming and supporting us Fund Fairness in all our communities across Milton Keynes. Thank you.